Do you really need an editor? Hi, welcome to WriterQuest. I'm Robert Gibson. Before we get started, remember to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and ring that little bell icon so that you're notified every time I post a new video. I try to post every other Monday. Do you really need an editor? What is an editor? Why do you need one? Aren't you a good enough writer on your own? The short answer to this is a resounding yes, you need an editor. But we're going to expand it a little bit because it's a little more complicated than that. Regardless of what you're writing or how you're writing or how you're going to publish, if you're going to traditionally publish or self-publish, you need an editor. Your book needs to be edited. There are 4 different kinds of primary edits. The first generally occurs pretty early on as you're writing, usually in your first draft, sometimes your second draft. It's what's known as the developmental edit. What this edit does, this doesn't really worry a lot about proofreading and checking your syntax and your grammar and your punctuation and your spelling and your use of capital letters and whether every single sentence starts with the word the. It doesn't really do any of that. Developmental edit is really focused on developing the story into something that makes more sense. Generally, your first draft, though it is a completed story, it's not polished. So the developmental edit helps with that. You can hire a developmental editor, but I don't know if there's really a lot of reason to. Really what you want from a developmental edit is the same that you're going to get from your alpha or your beta readers. Their feedback of what works in the story and what doesn't is your developmental edit. And then you go back through and you make your changes. Now you don't have to take their word as gospel. It's still your story, and there's still your words and your style that makes it what it is. So there's going to be some changes that they suggest that you don't have to follow. The next edit from there is a line edit. This is still kind of that next step. It's still that structural editing of the flow of the story and maybe how you divide up your chapters and exactly which chapter goes where. Because sometimes you have to move your chapters around in order to have the story make sense. That's what a line edit does. And most of the time, your developmental edit and your line edit kind of happen at the exact same time. They're going to be things that you do in concert with one another. Number 3 is your copy edit. This copy edit is what most of us would think of when we think of an editing. The person that does your copy editing should be a grammar Nazi. They should be somebody that's going to go through your work with a fine-tooth comb and make sure that every dot is over an I, every T is crossed, your capital letters are in the right places and for the right reasons. They're going to look at your sentence structure, your syntax, your grammar, the basic English rules that we all learned when we were in school that most of us have forgotten. I mean, let's be honest. I don't have to diagram sentences since I graduated from school. But a copy editor is someone that should know how to do those things. Your job is to tell the story. Their job is to polish the writing to fit the rules and requirements of our language. Copy editing is the typical red pen editing. This is where you're going to get your book marked up. Someone's going to be making a lot of marks in your book. And for the developmental edit and the line edit, a lot of that goes with your style. A lot of that goes with how you want to tell your story. What story do you want to tell? A lot of that is up to you whether or not to follow those suggestions or to ignore them. Once you get to the copy edit phase, you're pretty much going to take every suggestion unless you have a very specific stylistic reason to ignore it. You want your reading or writing to be the best it can be. You want the spelling right, the grammar right, the punctuation right. All of those things you need correct. So a copy edit isn't really one of those edits where you can call your editor and say, I don't really agree with this. There's a couple of them, like whether or not to use Oxford commas. Some people like them, some people don't. It's somewhat personal and you can choose, but generally speaking, whatever your editor says during the copy edit phase, you should do, because they are focused on the rules of the writing. They're not worried about the story and whether or not the twist might work or this character is flat. That's not what a copy editor is doing. The only time that I would say that's a real exception is if you're writing an accent, like a Southern accent, a Scottish accent, an English accent. Those kind of things are going to have their own little colloquialisms. They're going to have different punctuations and spellings in order to get the accent across in a written word. For example, the British, depending on where they're from in Britain, will drop their H's. Hello, that kind of thing. Well, you're going to need an apostrophe instead of the H to show that hello. And true copy editing is going to say, wait, do you need an H there? But you don't because you're writing an accent. Then you can ignore it. But that's kind of the only way you can do that, is if you're working in an accent or a language that's not English. If you have created your own language or something like that, is really the only way that works. And the last edit, the fourth one, is simply proofreading. This is really just someone looking back over it and making sure that everything's right. Generally, proofreading happens after your book has been formatted and after it's been edited all those different times, right before it goes to press to actually print the books. A final proofread is done to make sure there's not any extra errors that just happen to slip by everything. It's normal. That is what the 4 stages of editing are. Do you need an editor? Yes, you need an editor. You need all 4 of those edits to make your book the best possible. Your alpha readers and your beta readers take care of that developmental and the line edit. So those kind of come with the territory as you send them out to people and get them given back to you. You get that information back, you make your changes. The copy editing somewhat depends on how you intend to publish. If you're intending to self-publish your novel, you 100% absolutely must have that copy edit done before you put your book out, because you want that writing to be spotless. You want that writing to be beautiful, perfect English prose. If you don't have that copy editor, it probably won't be. You're going to miss commas, semicolons. That's my problem. I put a comma where I should have a semicolon all the time. Those kind of things are what a copy editor catches. And if you are self-publishing, it is a 100% necessity. You're going to pay for it. They're not cheap, especially good ones. You pay for what you get most of the time. You might be lucky and find a flat rate editor who does a good job. But generally speaking, you're going to need to lay out money, even for a flat rate. You're going to need to have a budget for your editing. If you're going the traditional publishing route, a copy editor is not the must-have that it is for self-publishing. It is by the time the book comes to publishing, but when you're querying agents and you're sending your book out on submission to publishers and you're doing that, it's not as critical that you have that edit done, because the traditional publishers have editors that do that for you. They're looking for that, so they already know they're going to have to go through an editor, and they have them ready to go. A lot of times your publisher will cover that, and they cover the cost. You don't have to pay for that editor. The publisher will do that once your book gets accepted. However, I would still recommend hiring an editor even if you're going to be traditionally published. I would hire this editor before you send your book out on Query. The reason why is sometimes your agent is kind of an editor as well. They know what they're looking for, and they get thousands of submissions a week. One way to make your book stand out to them is to already have it edited. Don't necessarily tell them, oh, and I also had this edited. They can tell. Really, they can. They know when the book is being polished and when it's still in the working phases. I would hire that editor because any chance you have to give yourself a leg up with your agent or a publisher, you should take. With thousands of submissions a week, you need to do something that sets you and sets your book apart. Getting an editor before you even submit is one of those really tiny things that may not feel as super significant at that point in the process. But when you send your book to an agent, they're looking at the story and how compelling it is. Of course they are. But at the same time, they're also noticing the work. And if you already are sending them a polished manuscript that's been edited, professionally edited, not just by you, professionally edited, it's going to stand out a little bit to them. Not only in the quality of the writing, because it's been improved with the correct syntax and the correct grammar and punctuation and spelling and all of those things, it's going to show that agent or that publisher that you really care about putting out the best possible product, or this book is ready with very minimal work right now. Those kind of things a publisher likes to hear, because if they are paying an editor, that's an expense that goes into setting up your book before your book is ever selling a copy. If they don't have to put as much out, they're making more in profit, as any business would. The less expense you have while still charging your regular profit means more profits coming in. That's why businesses are always looking to reduce their overhead, but not reduce their profit margin or their prices. It's the same with a publisher. So if you can present them with a already polished manuscript that's already been edited, it's easier to sell that book. So while publishers and sometimes agents employ editors already, if you have it pre-edited, it's going to make a big difference. Look around you. Don't just assume you have to pay for someone. I got super lucky. I got super blessed. My beta readers and alpha readers did a fantastic job on that developmental and line editing. It really helped the story flow better and just kind of tighten up. For copy editing, I actually happened to go to church with a guy who was an English professor. Okay, he was an adjunct professor of English. The guy knows our language. He offered to edit my book 100% free of charge. That is something that was massively important to me. It was amazing that someone would do that. But that's not something that's going to happen for most of you, let's be honest. I mean, I didn't think it was going to happen for me. Look around you. You might have somebody like that in your life. Do you have an aunt, an uncle, somebody who teaches English at a high school or college level? Doesn't have to be a college professor. That just happened to be who I had. But if you can find that person, talk to them. See if there's something you can do for them, or, trade in kind or whatever, or maybe even pay them to do that work for you. It especially helps if they know you, because then the way they edit it and the way they say it, you've got a personal relationship. It's not just some dude in a building in New York just ripping apart your book. It's someone you know who's giving you valuable feedback that you can then use. Whether you traditionally publish or self-publish, I think you need an editor. And I think you need it on the self-publishing side 100%, because as soon as you want to publish it, you can publish it. Whether that's as terrible as your first draft or as polished as your 90th, you definitely need one there. And proofreading, usually in self-publishing, you or someone you know is your own proofreader. Hey, read my book, point out any problems in the wording, and like, okay, you have the same town, but it's called 6 different names. You need to figure that out. And that's what proofreading does. It's after the formatting's done, everything's basically ready. They're just taking one last glance at everything to make sure that it works the way it's supposed to, and there's not any glaring errors. In a traditional publisher, that's done for you. They have proofreaders that go through that and go, hey, this is what needs to happen. Self-publishing, you're probably going to be your own proofreader. But regardless, you need those stages of editing, all 4 of them. Developmental editing and line editing, like I said, usually happen at the same time when you have your alpha readers and beta readers and they're kind of giving their feedback. Copy editing, hire somebody. Get somebody to edit your book, whether it's before you self-publish or before you query an agent. Just polish that book. Make it the best writing it can be. Don't worry about the story. Worry about the writing. That's what you want there. And then proofread it before you're done. That's the editing you need. And everyone needs it. Don't neglect your editing. It can make or break your entire book. Thanks for watching. This has been WriterQuest. I'm Robert Gibson. Remember to subscribe and click that bell icon, and I'll see you next time. So you've written, rewritten, rewritten again. So a question that I get from authors, no, I don't get questions.